Are you DTFF?
Again, here's Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football with your host, Jake Trowbridge and Dustin Lunt.
Wait a second.
Whoa!
There we go. Welcome back to DTFF, everyone. Sorry, audio folks. We had our screens switched, and it just threw me for a loop. I couldn't podcast.
So
like
uncomfortable.
It's
so uncomfortable being on the other side of the screen. Even though it changes nothing about my physical setting, it's really disconcerting.
It is. It's like if I were to sleep on the opposite side of the bed here at home, it just would feel so weird. I just can't do
I like
it.
that was the comparison that you used for us, by the way, now. It's like we're sharing sides of the bed because it is a very intimate podcast. And so I appreciate you putting that out there.
Yeah.
I 100% agree.
But we are back, folks. Happy to be here. Happy Tuesday evening. As always, if you're joining us live, thank you so much. We got a great episode here, a little bit different than what we've done in the past. Hoping this is one that you can come back to every offseason. More of an evergreen episode here. We are talking all about some essential tips for playing fantasy football. Things that we think are super important and things you should keep in mind, whether you're redraft, dynasty, it doesn't matter. These are all real viable options. If you're in a startup or like I said, or you're in a redraft draft every year, doesn't matter. So a little bit different than what we used to. We're going to kind of forego the normal intro stuff we do. No drunk trade this week. We're going to skip the news. Maybe we'll touch on it at the end.
We can touch on some news. Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Let's save it for the end for our audio listeners. That way they know, like, okay, evergreen portion of the podcast is done. I don't have to listen to the rest of this, 5 years from now.
I love that. And if you're listening to this 5 years in the future from when this was recorded, hello, and you're welcome for making that decision. So Dustin, kudos.
Yes. We'll cover some of that at the end. But the one thing we will cover right now, and we will not wait, is what are we drinking, Jake? Since you provided this lovely beer, I'm very excited to try this evening.
I happen to drop this one off on your doorstep because I know how much you love and appreciate a good Mexican lager. Mm-hmm. There's one thing I know about you, especially if the weather is just right. You want something with a little bit of lime, something that's very sessionable. And I think this one from Great Lakes has both of those things up to par for you, hopefully. It's a Great Lakes Mexican lager with lime. It's a simple beer. This is a simple concept. It's a 5.4% by alcohol, little brewski. The can, by the way, it's mesmerizing.
It's dynamite. I love
wonderful.
I love the iguana on it, hugging the lime ever so. Yeah. It's a very nice can. I like it.
The way one does. What do you think about the contents of the can? What do you think beyond the art?
It's okay. That's not bad. There's
just okay.
Yeah, just okay. There's a flavor I can't quite nail down to it. And maybe it'll grow on me. I don't know, because it says it's got lime peel and puree and flaked corn.
And flaked corn. I didn't even see this shit. Where was flaked corn in all of this?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. They're trying to make it like
most lagers have corn in them. That's not like that's a weird adjunct to put in. Like that is, especially in the US, like that is very much a staple in lagers.
Flaked corn is weird to say though. Why you got to say it like that, man? Can't you just call it corn? Flaked corn? What does that mean?
It means they run it through a press, basically, so it gets very thin, very fine. So it's like it's not the whole kernel. It allows the enzymes to get utilized better and broken down into the mash when you're making the beer. So it allows it. It helps add like body and alcohol percentages to your beer.
Well, you
have to run it through like a little mill to flatten it, basically like a little
stopper.
Yeah, or like
Smusher.
when they're rolling on the new pavement, they have the big rollers
Yeah.
on the highway. It's like one of those. Like they're big rollers that they just flatten them out like a penny on a train track.
Or that scene from Austin Powers where the guy is very slowly being chased in a
Yes.
corridor. By that
Yes.
scene, he was about to be the flaked corn.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
That is correct.
I had to put it into a context I could understand.
Yeah, it's not a bad beer. Like I said, there's just a little something that I don't know. It'll probably grow on me. I've got a second one here to put down before the end of the episode. So it's not bad at all. It's very easy drinking for almost 5.5%. It's very easy drinking. I don't have anything real negative to say about it, but like I said, there's just a little something that's I don't know.
It's off kilter.
Yeah,
I still maintain it's probably the flaked corn. You don't have anything bad to say about it. You don't have anything good to say about it yet. I'm hoping by the end of the show you'll change your mind. We'll see.
We will see. Yes. But yeah, let's get into this episode here without further ado. And so Jake, why don't you start us off here? Give us number 1, and we're going to do 10 here. Nice round number of 10. So Jake, start us off here. What's your first essential tip for playing fantasy football?
Yeah, any listicle worth its salt, any clickbaity magazine article is going to give you 10. They're not going to give you 11. They're not going to give you 13. They're going to give you 10. So these are our 10 essential tips for playing fantasy football. Before I get too far into this, we're taking this thing down to the studs. So maybe you're brand new to fantasy football. If so, welcome aboard and thank you for choosing us as your podcast. Maybe you just get a little bit too into the weeds sometimes and you want to take a step back and kind of take this thing down to the basics. Either way, I think it's important to kick off with number 1 on this list, which is simple. Understand your league scoring.
Extremely important.
I cannot say this enough. It is so simple, almost to the point of being silly to talk about. But every year, I've been guilty of it. 100% I've been guilty of it. I'm in a lot of leagues, a lot of different variety of leagues. Sometimes I don't just do the standard issue thing of looking at the scoring settings and saying, how many points do they get for a reception? Are there any bonuses in this league, right? If they burst off a 30-yard run, does that give them a bonus as opposed to just doing a 10-yard run? Do tight ends get a little something extra in this league? Do quarterbacks get a little something extra in this league? There are multitudes of varieties of fantasy football formats at this point. If you do a standard league, great. But just know that you are in a standard league before you start drafting and before you get into the mud. And it stretches beyond scoring too. I should say even things like roster construction. How many running backs do you have to start in your lineup every week? How many flex spots are available, right? Do those flex spots limit you to just running backs and wide receivers? Or can you flex a tight end? Or is it this magical realm of super flex where now you can flex a quarterback in that spot as well? This stuff has massive implications for how your players actually perform. And it's very easy. Let's say you've been in a few leagues up to this point, right? And you get comfortable with those leagues because I only do full PPR leagues. So I know exactly what I'm getting into. You might know exactly what you're getting into, but especially if you're venturing into a league with new people, maybe it's not your home league. Maybe it's a second home league. Maybe a family member who set up your league just didn't know what the hell they were doing. And you might want to double check that you understand what they actually did. But the difference, let's use a player, a steadfast player. I think a player that will hold water long after they're out of the NFL as a basis of comparison, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, amazing in any format, really, but especially amazing if it's a standard, no points per reception type of league. That's the type of thing that you want to be looking at And you don't want to figure this thing out halfway through your draft.
Nope.
After the draft, week 6, that's not the time to be taking a peek at these things. So very simple, very basic, but so necessary.
It really is. And that is a great one to lead off with, Jake. I know I've entered some leagues and not paid attention, and it's like, oh crap, what did I do? And really, if you want to play, especially Dynasty, where you have your roster multiple years, if you don't know what your league scoring is and what the settings are, it's going to put you behind the 8 ball, and you're going to have to probably tear it down after the first year because you screwed up and didn't draft based on what the league is. So, I think that's a great one and very much overlooked because people just want to join leagues and they're fun and whatever. They're all basically the same. Well, it's the same as in it's fantasy football, but that can be about where it ends, there's like you said, there's so many different types of scoring settings or league settings that can really throw a monkey wrench into anyone's plan. So great one to start with.
Thank you. And I get it, by the way, reading, who wants to do all that, right? It's like going through the terms and conditions when you sign up for a new app. Nobody wants to scroll through all that junk, but if you don't, you could find yourself in some pretty uncomfortable circumstances. You would think maybe I would apply this rule to outside of fantasy football, as in the example I just gave, but I'm probably not going to. But for fantasy football, it's much less than terms and conditions. So I'm fine with reading all of that. What do you have? Yeah.
Before we move on, we've got a question in the chat I want you to answer.
Okay.
So from Hoove here, how do you win your league?
This is a 3-step process. Hoove in the chat. Step 1, you're already doing, which is watching the Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football podcast. So step 1 complete. Step 2 is making sure that you subscribe to the Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football podcast. Step 3 is listening to the rest of this very episode and probably some future episodes as well. So that's a 3-step process for winning your league's championship.
Oh, Jake, I could not have said that any better. God bless you. That was amazing.
You're welcome. And you're welcome. All right. What is number 2 on our list?
Number 2. This is something I really take to heart, and I think more people should. I think people get really hung up on this. And it's don't worry about bye weeks. Whether it's redraft, dynasty, doesn't matter. It's 1 week out of the year. If all your players are on bye, well, that week you're going to lose. But chances are, if all your players are on bye 1 week, you're going to win the rest of your weeks because that kind of puts you in an advantage when it comes to having these bye weeks with your league mates. If all of them happen to be on one. Now, do I go out of my way to plan on having all my players on the same bye week? No. But if it just actually happens that way, it's like, okay, it happens. My only caveat with this, and again, it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the first point there with your league settings, is depending on when your fantasy playoffs start, you want to make sure that, if there's late bye weeks in the NFL, that doesn't coincide with the start of the fantasy playoffs. I know we had that issue a couple seasons ago. It threw the fantasy world into just, a Twitter because we didn't know what to do with ourselves. So that's the only caveat with that. Like I said, if you know what your league settings are, it's not a problem. But otherwise, don't worry about it. I think people put too much stock in that and they worry too much about having too many players on bye. It's like, no, everyone's going to have players on bye. It doesn't matter in the end. Just draft good players, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize, you cannot overemphasize, if your league playoffs start in week 13, you do not want all of your players to be on bye in week 13. So yes, very important caveat. Now, Dustin, what happens if I draft 2 tight ends? I only have to start one of them, but both tight ends have the same bye week. What then, Dustin?
Well, you have a couple of options. You can hit the waiver wire, which we will be talking about later. Some tips for that. Or you just don't have a tight end start that week because they're on bye and there's nothing you can do about it. Your roster's full. What are you going to do? Can't help it. Take a 0.
The average tight end scores like 3.4 fantasy points. So you're going to have to sacrifice those 3.4 fantasy points for that 1 week. I do love it. I understand you can acknowledge them. I'm of the mind you can use bye weeks as tiebreakers if you want. You're between two players. You go, I don't know which one to draft. If you want to look at the rest of your roster and say, where's the bye week come into play? I'm fine with that. Just don't go crazy. Don't go overboard.
Yeah, like I said, just people put way too much stock into bye weeks and focus too much on them. And it's just don't. It's okay.
Yeah. Now, Dustin, this next one, step number 3. Look, we're hosts of a podcast about fantasy football. We tend to do a fair amount of research. But I do want to say, when you're going into your leagues, do research, but do just enough research to feel comfortable. Don't overload yourself, especially if you're newer to fantasy football. And there's so many articles that are available out there. Don't even get me started on Twitter. There's so many tweets, so many podcasts, so many YouTube videos. You're watching 2 of those things right now.
What is this Twitter you talk about? I'm only familiar with X.
Oh, my apologies. X. As if I didn't want to date this episode at all, I went ahead and used that. But in any case, there's a lot of information out there for you to use. And yes, you want to know what you're doing. You want to have a general understanding. Like I said, look at the league scoring. Great. Check out bye weeks. If you're into that, fine. Understand which players you want to go after, who you value more than you don't. What is your favorite analyst looking to do? How much do you want to follow them? Do some research. I'm not advocating for going into your drafts or your season completely blind, although sometimes that can be fun. Probably not the best way to win your league, but it can be fun. But don't get yourself so into a research hole that you overwhelm yourself and you just kind of go, fuck it. Now I'm so confused, more confused than when I started this thing. You know, not everybody has to look at these crazy detailed metrics. There's a metric for everything in fantasy football, almost at this point in time. Some of these advanced metrics, these advanced statistics can be useful. They can be helpful if you know how to use them. I don't know how to use like half of them. I'll be honest. So I, either ignore those ones because there's nothing worse than using information wrongly. I'd rather not use the information at all. Or I rely on the very smart people who do understand them to tell me what I should know and take from those. I ain't ashamed to admit when I don't understand something. But the point of this is just don't get so caught up in the weeds that you lose the forest, right? Is that the expression? That can't be the expression. Yeah? Okay. That's what I'm saying then.
You don't see the forest through the trees.
The trees, not the weeds. That's what it is. The weeds might come into effect as well in the forest on a much lower scale, I suppose.
Yeah, and that just to add on there a little bit, you know, even just a little bit of research, like, you know, we're talking more of like off season here where it's like you're getting ready for your drafts or whatever. But even in season, like understanding like, okay, in November and December, you know, I have Nick Chubb. They play in Cleveland in an outdoor stadium where the weather is nasty, you know, understanding those types of things that, you know, weather can impact players, and doing just a little bit of research there, even just to stay on top of those things. Again, it's just enough, just those little things. It's like you said, it's all out there on Twitter or your favorite analyst. That's not us, you know, because we don't put out weather reports in season, but you know, find your favorite analyst that does, you know, just that little bit of extra can really help you go a long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. Where do you want to take us for tip number 4?
I want to talk rookies a little bit here. So, and this is more redraft oriented than dynasty, but also applies to dynasty as well. So, for your rookies, running backs and quarterbacks, they can be useful early and right out of the gate. I shouldn't say avoid rookie wide receivers and tight ends. Just don't plan on them being very viable to start the year. Are there always exceptions to that rule? Yes. You have your Jamar Chase or your Garrett Wilson or, Chris Olave last year. Yeah, there's always the exceptions, but you should know those guys are stepping into a stud role or the number one role on their team. The rest of those guys that we love, like your, Zay Flowers this year, or totally drawing a blank on the rookie wide receivers. Jackson Smith and Jigba, like these guys.
Kayshon Boutte.
Yeah, like we love all these guys. They're the hot names, but chances are they're not going to produce right out of the gate. What we've seen historically is that as the year goes on, they get more acclimated with the NFL, more familiar with the playbook. Then later in the season, you can kind of count on them more often. So just know if you're going to be drafting your rookie wide receivers or tight ends, you're probably going to have to stash them on your bench for a good chunk of the season. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Just be ready to hold on to them for the long haul and not drop them to the waiver wire after the first couple weeks when they're not doing anything. You may regret that later. Now, running backs, I mean, those guys are useful. Running backs seem to get injured so often that a rookie running back can just pop into a role and will have that legitimate usage and get that work. So running backs, okay. Wide receivers, tight ends, just pump the brakes a little bit and know that they're probably not going to be starting for you on your team right away when the season starts.
Yeah, in fact, I'll add on to that and emphasize rookie tight ends as a massive avoid. You said, well, I don't know if I'd say avoid. In that case, I would say avoid. There's been like 2 tight ends in the last decade that came in as rookies and were usable for fantasy for most people's purposes during their rookie season. I mean, Kyle Pitts came out as a generational tight end talent as advertised. And you knew what you were getting yourself into with Kyle Pitts. And even it's not like he came out the gate week 1 immediately amazing. He was definitely useful for your season, though. But in general, rookie tight ends, I'm going to avoid. And I'll say, I don't want these guys on my bench because I know I'm not going to be able to drop them weeks 1 through 3, probably. Like, I know they're going to be on my team, on my bench, those first few weeks. Can't drop them because that's what you drafted them for. You drafted knowing they won't go off right away. Meanwhile, as we will talk about a little bit later in this show, you might have other uses for those bench spots that these guys are now taking up. They're taking that flexibility away from you. So yeah, I like that. Rookie quarterbacks, I think you just have to look at the team situation probably a lot. Same with rookie running backs. But that's what's nice about it. You can go, well, I know if they're going to start or probably start, and I know what the situation is that they're getting into. It's not just about talent like it is with wide receivers and tight ends a lot of the time. So love that. Absolutely love that. That said, I'm an idiot for not drafting Jamar Chase his rookie season because I was worried about preseason drops. Oh, what are you going to do? But I'm going to, in my drafts, per tip number 5, I'm going to take the safety at the front of the drafts and upside in the back. Let's call this the mullet rule. Safety at the front, upside in the back. What that means is in your first few rounds of any draft, you're probably not going to win your draft necessarily in those first few rounds, but you can damn sure lose it in those first few rounds. If you have a player who busts, who way underperforms what your expectation is of them, or the industries or the consensus's view of what they should do, if they way underperform that, you can pretty well screw yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these players that get drafted high, sometimes that happens because there's this overwhelming amount of hype.
And I've got a perfect example for this, Jake. This was probably back in 2012, 2013. It was right after Michael Vick had that incredible season, his resurgence after being suspended. And I had that following season, I had the number 1 pick in the draft. And this is before I knew better. I was still young in my fantasy football days here. And I took Michael Vick first overall. I'm like, he was the cheat code last year. Like, he did so amazing, severely underperformed. And basically, I was screwed right out of the gate because he did not return that value, or not even close. So yes, you can lose your draft in those early rounds.
I've been there myself. In the Le'Veon Bell holdout year, took Le'Veon Bell at like the 5 spot in the first round of the draft. Going, what's the worst that could happen? He holds out a couple of weeks, then he comes back week 3, right? You hold this guy on your bench for a couple of weeks, but I know he's coming back, and when he does, he'll win my league. Instead, Le'Veon Bell did not play a snap of football that year. Luckily, I had picked up his backup in the tail end of the drafts, but still, that move was horrible for my season because it wasn't a safe move at all. In the back part of your draft, middle rounds, late rounds, you take all of the crazy hype players that you want that have maybe not a solid, what we call floor, right? A reasonable floor of production that they shouldn't go below. If you want to shoot for the moon with those guys, I think you do that all day long.
Do you do the finger guns with that too? Every time
I click it. Every single time. In fact, I'm so busy doing the finger guns a lot of the time that I don't actually click the button. And sometimes it auto drafts for me. That's a risky take, but it's worth it because when those guys hit in your later rounds and they're risky, great. You know a couple of things. You know, they panned out in the first few weeks and I did amazing, or they didn't pan at all in the first few weeks. I can drop them. That's fine. They were a stab in the dark just to see what would happen. But when they hit, it's so vital for your team. But again, deal with that crap in the later part of your draft. Get nuts in the later part of your draft. Don't do that at the start because it's the fastest way to crater your start to the fantasy football season. So take the guys you know are going to be productive, are going to be safe. Obviously, anybody can get injured. Weird shit happens. But in general, you tend to know who the safe players are going into your draft.
That's right. Don't have anything else to add to that. Perfect, Jake. All right, number 6. So this one is not a little bit. This one is more dynasty related, and that's okay because this is for everyone. So for dynasty, don't worry about setting a lineup in the offseason. If you're going out making trades or you're drafting rookies in your rookie draft every year, don't worry about looking at your lineup and filling those holes. Just draft best player available, trade for good players. If someone offers you a trade, say you're wide receiver heavy and they offer you another wide receiver, it's like, yeah, maybe I don't need this, but I can always trade them later. You know, just one trade doesn't mean you're done unless you're in our home league. But otherwise, yeah, just use that trade and then trade the player away. Or if you like that player, trade, another wide receiver in this example away. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, just get good players on your team and worry about filling those roster holes as the season gets closer to starting. So as we're going into training camp, you want to pay attention to players. And that's the time where you're like, okay, X player, use your James Conner example from years ago. He's holding out. Do I want to try to trade for him because I think he's going to come back and play? Or do I want to trade him off my roster because I just don't want to deal with that uncertainty? And, just just don't worry about your lineup in the offseason. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just try to get better players on your team, because those are just chips to be traded away later if needed.
Agreed. When we're in dynasty format, which we are right now, if you're listening to this live as we're doing this, or the week after, we are in the thick of when people start to get a little antsy, I would say. It's a month plus before the season starts, before we get some form of NFL action, I should say. And people start to, around this time, go, I don't have much running back depth, right? I've got one starting running back. I've got a couple of questionable guys behind him. I should go ahead and trade for another solid running back. And in doing so, you might give up more than you should, because you're so fixated on, as you said, filling that one hole. When in reality, we've got multiple holes to fill, people. Am I just talking about your roster? Probably. Maybe not. But the point is that at this point, maximum value, that's all it's about. So if you can, I've done it before where I've taken a position down to the studs during this part of the offseason. I've been like, well, I'm not going to have a tight end at this point. I'll trade off somebody who values, the tight ends that I do have, maybe because there's camp hype that comes out. There's blurbs, right? This time of the year, there's always a blurb about a player that offers a sell window, a trade window for them. So I'll do that, and I'll deal with getting that spot filled the week before. Maybe that means I even have to pay up a tiny bit at that point. I'm fine with it, because in the long haul, I think you get way more value doing that. So I do love that. And hey, even for short-term redraft people, if you're in a one-year league where you're just drafting, there's an argument to be made. If you know that the people you're in a league with will trade a lot, and we'll talk about this a little bit, then you can even get away with just drafting maximum value in your draft and not worrying about filling every starting position at your draft.
Very true. Very true.
So something to keep in mind. Now, here's where we get emotional. Here's where I get emotional, Dustin, because it's very easy in fantasy football to have rooting interests and to love certain players, whether it's because they're on your favorite NFL team or you've just had them on your previous team so often that you get enamored with them. They've done great things for you in the past, right? It's easy to get attached. Rule number 7, don't get too attached to your players. Never get too attached. We want to appreciate them for what they've done. We want to keep it objective, though, right? We want to look backwards and understand what they did 2, 3, 4 years ago, even last year sometimes. It was wonderful. It was a great time you had together. It doesn't mean you've got to stay out with them going forward. And this is even true throughout the course of your year or season. You draft a player. The first 5 weeks, they dominate. They absolutely help you crush your opponent every single week, right? They're putting up multitudes of points. You get enamored. You're like, you're an every week starter for me now. Never sitting you again because you just have gone off every week. Week 6, that's a kind of a dud week. You didn't do it for me. What's going on, man? Week 7, same kind of deal. Week 8, you did a little something there. I'm starting to get nervous about you, though. Week 9, week 10, week 11, it just, nothing is happening. People will be so indebted to these players, so attached to players, they still won't sit them. After all the signs are there, right? You've heard people talk about this in relationships with exes, getting too attached, right? Not cutting the cord when you should, not moving on when you should. You need to know when to move on from a player. Maybe that doesn't mean dropping them from your team. Maybe it just means sitting them on the bench to let them think about what they've done. Let them understand what your value is, not what their value is. They're trying to win you over, right? So don't get too caught up in that where you stick with a player just because you're used to it.
Yeah, and just to tag onto that a little bit too. Once you've drafted your team, draft capital doesn't matter anymore. Then they're just players on your roster. So just because you drafted a player the first round, second round, third round, don't feel like you have to start them every week if they're not performing. You're doing yourself a disservice. So once the draft's over, draft capital does not matter anymore.
Absolutely. The draft is in the past. Your championship's about the future. You got to look to the future, man. All right, Dustin, what do you want to talk about next?
All right, let's talk waivers a little bit here. It's important to be active on the waivers and however your waiver system is set up. And there's probably a million different ways that waivers run or they can be set up. I think the most common one is the FAB system, where you're allotted a pot of money. You can spend as much as you want on a player any given week. Basically, it's a bid that you say, okay, who would be a good player? We'll go back to Zay Flowers. He probably won't be drafted in redraft leagues this year. So say he pops off week one. I want to put $5 of FAB money down. Jake, you're going to put $6 down because you're sure someone's going to put a bid out for him. And it's whoever bids the most money gets that player. So that's how the FAB system works. I know there's other ones. A lot of it is just first come, first serve. So if you put in the claim for that player first, you automatically get them. It's based on like how your schedule is and what your record is on the season.
There's standings.
Lots of different ways to parse that out and cut it up. But no matter where you are with your waivers and what system you're using, it's important to stay active out there and read the tea leaves, especially with players that are coming off of injury. Say they're injured to start the season and they're coming off the PUP list. If they're suspended for a certain number of games, like Alvin Kamara, there's talk he could be suspended. Most leagues, he'll probably still be drafted. Probably not a great example for this, but fact meaning, say he's on the waiver wire, he's going to be coming back. Maybe snag him a week or two early before your other league mates catch on to the hype. So you want to be active, searching for that diamond in the rough. If you have a guy that's, popping off, there's usually a way you can flag them and just say, hey, I want to watch this guy. And just put those flags out there so you can have that constant reminder like, oh yeah, I'm keeping an eye on him. And if, they pop off for a couple weeks and the situation looks good, jump on it before the rest of your league mates do. Because that's the way to win your league is really being ahead of the curve when it comes to finding those diamonds on your waiver wire.
And this flows perfectly with two of the other things we've already talked about. It works in conjunction. Don't get attached to your players, right? Because if you keep a guy on your bench or on your roster beyond his expiration, you potentially miss out on these players from waivers that you could be picking up that could be doing much better things for you. And same with the rookies and how you draft them. Drafting a rookie tight end, expecting them to give you fantasy points in week 8. That's great, but you have 7 weeks now where they have to stay put and you don't get to pick up a waiver ad. You don't get a splurge on your FAB. By the way, one thing to point out with FAB, I think it stands for free agent acquisition budget. I think somebody can Google that if they want to fact check, but it is a blind bidding competition. So you never know what your league mates are going to do. Of course, everybody has to put it in blindly. And then that's why you have to be a little spendy sometimes, right? Don't restrict yourself too much. Don't tighten the purse string so much that you miss out on players. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't, if there's a guy you want, go get him. Like just spend the money, go get him. Don't think, well, I have to save some money or save these waiver claims for the end of the year. If that's a guy you feel like can really help your team and really help, keep you competitive and help you win that championship, spend all your FAB on them. It doesn't matter. In the end, if that's what it takes to win, it doesn't matter. Will your league mates chastise you a little bit and give you a hard time? Most likely, but that's okay. when you win the championship, you'll be the one laughing all the way to the bank. So it doesn't matter.
Rule 8B. Learn how to talk shit to your league mates and take shit from your league mates. That is rule 8B. It should honestly be rule 1, probably. In this thing. It is one of my favorite parts of playing fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be willing to take as much as you give. I do love that. You cannot overstate that enough. Being active. I think most people tend to lose their leagues because they're not active enough, right? Whether it's in some people just lose interest too, by the way. I hope you don't. I hope that your fantasy football league keeps your interest all the way through the season. And if it's not holding your interest, maybe talk to your commissioner of your league about why and see if there's anything that you could change about your league.
And one more thing, briefly about waivers. Know when your waivers run. That goes back to number 1 with your league settings. Know when your waivers run. Do they run at midnight on Tuesday? Is it 6 a.m. on Wednesday? Is there a waiver run on Wednesday and then one on Saturday? Again, it goes back to your league settings. Very important to know when the waivers run, because then you know when to put your bids in by to get your guys. So just another aside there.
Very true. Yeah. Sometimes waivers have their initial run where you've got to put your entry of players that you want in. And then once that runs, now you can just pick up players willy-nilly throughout the rest of the week. Sometimes. Yep. So yes, always stay informed. Back to rule number 1. That's why it's rule number 1. Rule number 9 is not rule number 1 because it's important. It's not that important, but I do find throughout the course of your season, this applies, of course, to dynasty, long-term leagues, but it applies just as much to redraft, 1-year leagues. Again, don't get too attached to players. Stay active. Part of that involves trading. So find the right trade partners in your league and be willing to compromise on trades. So here's the general idea, okay? It means stepping outside of yourself just a little bit. You know what your team is. You hopefully know what your team needs. Say it's halfway through the season and you go, man, I don't know. These wide receivers just aren't cutting it for me. I need a stud in here, somebody I can rely on every single week. And I don't have that. And I can't find it on waivers right now. Take a look at your league mates' rosters. What do they have? Does somebody out there have an overabundance of receivers? So much so that they can't even start all of the great guys that they have on the roster. They're forced to bench a couple of these dudes every single week. And maybe they don't have a running back that they feel confident in. But you've got a bunch. You've got a gaggle over here of running backs. Same situation. Just do some very simple basic math. Here's what I have. Here's what I need. Here's what they have. Here's what they need. And make your trades make sense. So that's what I mean by finding the right trade partner. And willing to compromise is as simple as this. Not everybody's going to like your trade ideas. People hate mine most of the time, especially the initial ones. Dustin can attest to this.
Absolutely.
He's been through this with me, right? Hate it. So when they come back, and let's say that they want to counter offer your trade and say, I didn't love that. Here's what I'd like instead. If you throw down the gauntlet and just say out of the bat, it's this or nothing. This is my ideal trade. This is what I want. This is the only thing I'm accepting. You're kind of screwing yourself. You're closing yourself off to your league mates. Nobody's going to want to deal with somebody like that, first of all. If that's the philosophy, you'll probably get no interest and no reciprocity from your league mates. But also, too, you don't have to, what's the phrase, Dustin? Win every trade. You don't have to do that. People love to win a trade so that they can talk about it to all of the rest of the league or their friends on social media, post a screenshot. Look at this fucking awesome trade I just did.
How smart I am.
Didn't I absolutely crush this? It's like, yeah, maybe you did. And it's not necessarily something wrong with doing that. But if that's your only goal is to win every trade, you're going to lose out on a lot of potential. I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago. So if this is your first episode, venture back a couple. I've made some bad starting trades. Drunk, admittedly, but I've made some bad starting trades that ultimately fostered much better trades down the road because people get comfortable with people who are willing to trade, willing to compromise, negotiate, whatever.
Yep, absolutely. And don't be afraid in the compromise. Like you said, don't be afraid to quote unquote lose the trade. If you have to chip in something a little bit extra to get the deal done, if it's a player you truly believe in, small price to pay to get the guy you want. So don't be afraid to have to put in a little bit extra just to get the guy you want.
Agreed. That fourth tight end that you've been, for whatever reason, keeping on your roster. I don't know. I really believe he could pop off by the end of the season. Okay, but do you need him? Can't you just give him up to somebody who's willing to give you what you really need?
Exactly. All right. And then to round this off with a nice number 10, have fun. Fantasy football is supposed to be fun. It's a game we play. It's a game within a game. We're playing a game about the game of NFL football. Like, it's supposed to be fun. So you could, in theory, just say, fuck these guys, and I'm not going to listen to the damn thing they just said for the last 45 minutes. It doesn't matter. And that's fine. Play the game how you want to play it. If there's certain players you want and ADP to be damned, so be it. If you like to make trades because it's fun for you, go ahead and make all the trades. It doesn't matter. Play the game and build your team however you want. This is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to enjoy it. If you just don't care about winning and you just want to be in leagues, just chat with other fantasy players or, the managers of their teams, that's great. That's fine. You don't have to win. It's nice. I would hope most people want to, join leagues to win, get a little cash back, but some people don't. That's okay. Do whatever makes you happy. It's your team. Build it how you want. And end of the day, that's all that matters.
Now, while I 1000% agree with everything that you just said, Dustin, every word of it, if you're one of those people out there who only play fantasy football because you want to destroy your league mates, you want to make them feel nothing but pain and suffering, shoot me a DM. We'll talk about how to accomplish that as well.
Or just follow the previous 9 steps because it will get you there.
Yeah, that too, for sure.
Okay, Jake. Anything else in regards to the top 10 here? Any other essential tips you want to give here as bonus ones, maybe?
I would say, I think the essentials we've covered. I would say some borderline essentials that are out there that are interesting for folks is when you're in the heat of a draft. We didn't talk a ton about that. We talked a little bit about drafting, which to me is the most fun part of most leagues, by the way.
Absolutely.
I just love to draft, especially if you get to do it in person. Nothing better than an in-person draft with your pals, right? Maybe at a Buffalo Wild Wings type of establishment, throwing back some beers, whatever the case is, right? That's very fun. Don't get so caught up in the moment that you explode at the idea of losing out on one of these players you really wanted on your roster. What we call in the biz tilting. Try not to do too much of the tilting. Shit happens. I would say try to take the same philosophy at home on Sundays while you're watching the games and maybe watching your team just get utterly destroyed. Try not to tilt too much, but you're gonna feel it sometimes. It's inextricable. That's not the word. Inextricable, I think. It's linked. It's fucking linked to fantasy football. Feeling a little bit of shame, a little bit of pain. I think that's all built into it. But no, Dustin, anything that you want to add here?
No, I feel like we covered the essentials really well. Very solid list.
I agree. I'm partial, but I agree with you. Dare we talk about some of this now with the essentials out of the way? With the longevity of the podcast intact for the first 50 minutes, the evergreen nature of it. Is there anything you want to talk about that's happening in the NFL now or recent?
Well, yeah, I think we should. There's a couple things to touch on here. As training camps are starting to get up and running in full force for all teams. Big news: Saquon signed a 1-year deal, so he's not going to be holding out. So if you had that opportunity to buy the little bit of a dip you could have gotten, you missed that window. I'm sorry, but wheels up for redraft this year. I think he's going to be out to prove something to the Giants that they should have given him a longer term extension. So I'm expecting him to. I wouldn't be surprised if he was the RB1 this year. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there are a few things better for fantasy value than a running back on a very short contract with something to prove.
Yep.
And Saquon, like you said, absolutely falls into that value bucket. Now, if you're sad about missing out on the dip, like you said for Saquon, can I interest you in a Josh Jacobs, who is in a similar boat as Saquon was just a short 24 hours ago?
I know. That one
is
worries
still
me.
in the thick of it. But look, everybody was worried about Saquon leading up to this very moment. That was your time to strike. I understand it's scary. It's very scary to do it. I don't take it lightly. But Josh Jacobs is currently in that exact situation with nobody really behind him on the depth chart, just like Saquon.
Right.
Saquon had Matt Breida and Eric Gray. I think they signed James Robinson just to kind of nudge him a little bit. Same situation happening with the Raiders right now with Josh Jacobs. They have Zamir White. They have Amir Abdullah.
Ooh, the Abdullah train. Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be Josh Jacobs. This is my whole point.
Let's bring back 2017 again here. Get the Abdullah train going.
I was maybe not a conductor, but I was a front row passenger on that Amir Abdullah train back then.
A lot of us were.
I'm not going to be. I'll take that same hat, put it on myself as the Josh Jacobs guy right now, because I think he'll come out and sign and be in a similar situation.
I hope so. He has come out and said, I am going to hold out if I don't get a new contract. So
sure, there was similar language that Saquon used as well. He had said, I think somebody asked him. This was like 4 days ago. They're like, "Hey, what? Are you going to start week 1?" And he said, "It's on the table that I don't." Like that was the implication. Like if I have to hold out to get my money, I will. And then that moved it along. I guess, do we trust the Raiders management? Maybe is a better question.
No, I don't.
All right. That's fair. I'll take the chance.
I mean, and Jacobs, you're going to get a little bit later. He's going in that kind of third tier of running backs, I guess you could say. Outside your, top 12, he's going to be in that RB9. He'll be in 12. The top.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know. For me personally, and talking about what we were saying in the, the mullet analogy earlier, you want your safe players if you're drafting them earlier.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that falls into that bucket for me for this year, but if he falls far enough, yeah. I mean, there's always a spot where I will draft him, but given right now where his ADP is, I'm a little bit nervous. So we'll have to see once we get closer to the start of the actual regular season, if there's been any sort of movement there. But Magic 8 Ball says not looking good.
And to be clear, for me, the value is coming in dynasty formats of trying to trade for right now, rather than, with the ADP with the redraft. If it's a situation where preseason week 3, Josh Jacobs is still nope, not doing it, he's off my draft board. It's as simple as that. And I won't draft anybody else on the Raiders unless they sign Leonard Fournette or one of these other free agents that still need a
Zeke.
team.
Would you do it if it was Zeke?
No, I wouldn't do it if it was Zeke. I would do it if it was literally any of the other 3 that are holding out. Fournette, Hunt, Dalvin Cook, sure. Yeah. Zeke, no fucking way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what other news? I know there's been a lot of just the hype videos.
DeAndre Hopkins to the Titans. I think we talked about a little bit last week.
Kadarius Toney, knee injury. It sounds like he has to have surgery. So that's not good. I mean, I wasn't very high on him this year anyway. especially where he sounded like he was going to be going in drafts for redraft this year. He would have been too rich for my blood. I just not the biggest believer. So disappointing that is this might be his last chance here in a very young career, which would be disappointing for him and for all of us. But we'll have to see what happens and how long he's actually out. But not looking good to start the season here, at least.
Yeah, you never, of course, root for injuries. You never take any fun out of injuries. I will say, if somebody had asked me a month ago who's the most likely player to get injured this season, I would just instinctively say Kadarius Toney, because
That's fair.
Almost kind of felt like a given. Unfortunately, it does open up things on that depth chart for wide receivers like Sky
Justin
Moore
Ross season
and Justin Ross. Maybe you like Rashee Rice, the rookie. Maybe you like MVS, which is still foolish to me, but there is an opportunity for another wide receiver there. So I'm planting on the Justin Ross train, probably because he's just so late and my cheapness comes into effect, but I'm into it.
Yep. Same here. And he has the pedigree. The only reason he didn't get drafted last year as a rookie was because of the injury. And it was serious, it was a neck injury. It was something very, to be very concerned about, but it looks like he's recovered from that. He's, participating fully. He's making plays in training camp. So he has the skill set to be an elite receiver. And it wouldn't surprise me if that were to actually happen. So nice. Chances very high. No, but he is a guy very late. I'd be willing to plant my flag on and take him at the end of my drafts, just on that off chance. He's one of those high upside players. Again, one of your mullet players, Jake, that we talked about.
Big time mullet guy. If he wore a mullet for week 1, he would never leave my roster. Rule number 7: don't get attached to players. Be damned. I would get so attached to him, he would never leave that bench, even if he never did anything the rest of this season. Outside of that, Justin Herbert, before we started recording, got a massive 5-year contract. Got paid. I'm very happy for the guy. I'm very happy for Justin Herbert. I will say this shouldn't move the needle for anybody's value for him in Dynasty. That would be double counting to me. This is what we expected to happen. He's a great player. He should get paid. Maybe you didn't expect this size of contract that he got, but don't move him up just because he got paid.
That's right. We already knew he was a great player. And that shouldn't affect him in your rankings whatsoever.
Yeah.
If anything, for Dynasty, it just means that he's in a more stable, he's going to be with the Chargers. So maybe for Dynasty, it gives you a little bit of extra clarity there. If you like that situation, but it shouldn't have moved the needle one iota.
Yeah. No iota movement happening for Justin Herbert. Anything else happening in the news that you can think of? There's nothing that stands out to me.
No, I think those were the highlights, really, for this week. I'm sure next week there's going to be a lot more as we inch closer and, really into training camp and it's full throttle. So looking forward to it.
Hopefully not a ton of injury news coming out.
That's right.
That's what we want. No injury news.
But yeah, we're only a couple weeks away from the Hall of Fame game.
Yes, indeed.
We are just mere almost single-digit days away from football being back. We are so close. I can almost taste it. And I am so excited.
And it tastes like lime and flaked corn.
That's right.
Bring it back to the beginning of this show. Have you come around at all on this beer, Dustin, by the end of this thing? What do you think?
It's a fine beer. It's fine. And I'm not blown away by it. It's fine. If you were to, if I said, hey, Jake, toss me a beer out of the cooler and you toss this one at me, I drink it. It's good. It's fine. It's just doesn't.
Dustin's
no
basic synopsis. This beer, it's not piss water. That is the endorsement that I'm getting from you right now with this beer.
Yeah. And
I don't think they're going to make a commercial out of that, but I mean, it's better than the alternative.
It's fine. I don't know. It just doesn't blow me away. And what's better than a beer that you can just drink anytime and you say, like, yeah, this is fine. I know what I'm getting out of it.
A beer that you can drink anytime and go, that's amazing. That's what's better. That's
true.
Better than this one.
Fine. It's a fine beer.
If I had to, real quick before we wrap this up, if I had 2 beers in my hand, ice cold, both of them, I have this beer and I have a Hams in the other hand. Which one are you taking?
Good question. I might take a Hams.
With no answer. Hey, this isn't me trying to trap you.
No, I know.
It was a win-win for me.
Well, I mean, it
it.
is. They're both, again, I love Hams. This Great Lakes Mexican Lager is fine. I wouldn't be disappointed with either of them.
All right.
Yes.
All right. It's fine. We're not getting the hot takes for beers tonight.
No.
That's all right.
Not this week. Okay. I think that'll do it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Remember to come back to this episode next year, or at any time you want a reminder of like, hey, what are some things that are going to make me a better fantasy football player? This episode, just bookmark it wherever you listen to your podcast as one of your favorite episodes, so you know you can always come back and listen to it. As Jake said earlier to our friend Hoove in the chat, make sure you subscribe, listen to us weekly. We're here every Tuesday live on YouTube. Give us a rate and review wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate it. Hit us up in our DMs if you have any questions for us. You roster construction questions, trade questions, drunk trades. Shoot us in our DMs for that. We're here. Or if you have non-fantasy football related questions, we'll answer those too. We especially like music related questions. We will have opinions about music for sure. That will either delight you or enrage you. But we're here for all of it. So yeah, we're here for whatever you need, especially fantasy football as we're inching closer to redraft here. So that'll do it for this week, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, FFers.